G'day friends and fans, and welcome to Dave Talk Stuff Ukraine War Update for the 14th of November 2025. I'm your host, the author, David Applegate, author of the books The Boyhood of Cade, Power Games, Into the Elsebound, and Erotic Tales from the Empire. Part 1 out now, Part 2 coming soon. Thank you to all those who support the channel. You support the channel through the links in my link tree. You can support me on Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. Now, what's really going on in Ukraine? A lot of mainstream media has actually reported fragments. And are you going to watch 4 hours of mainstream media to piece it all together? I hope not. I hope you don't rot your brain and let me filter it out for you. But yes, there was a massive drone and missile strike. Yes, it is apparent that Ukrainian air defenses failed in many sectors. Every suburb of Ukraine was hit by drones as Russia systematically plucked the flies off their wings. Now, allegedly yesterday, after I finished filming, Russia also hit a major Ukrainian airbase with an Iskander. As well as that, there were explosions across Ukraine. Now, these were around 200 drones in all that hit their targets. Now, Ukraine claims to have shot down 200, but wait, how could they shoot down 200 drones when the same media is reporting that they hit? So, French media, English media, they don't seem to be on the same page anymore with AP and Reuters. There seems to be a schism going on in the mainstream media. I think with the desperate, pursuit of ratings, they have to try and bring people back. People, after years of being told Ukraine's holding on, they're not believing it anymore. They see the refugees. They hear the refugees. They know that if refugees are flowing, Ukraine can't be winning. Okay? They know from pro-Ukrainian maps that they no longer use on most of mainstream media. Instead, they refer to these fragment maps over here they get off the Ukrainian, which ironically they get off the same Ukrainian site in a different color scheme, but they use fragments of the map. But I think people notice the towns going from front line to rear line, and eventually it sinks in that Ukraine is not winning. And now they hear that Ukraine is not 100, not 200, not 170 billion, but 400 billion in debt. They make at peak GDP 127. Right now, they could be as low as 52 to 54. Even if they could put all their GDP into repaying their 400 million. No, they are going to be in a war debt for 150 years. And that doesn't include rebuilding. And now, of course, the value of the Russian assets they want to steal to pay for Ukraine won't. They will lose foreign investment. People will never trust Europe again. The whole point, these banking, sporting, they're trying to politicize everything. They are taking away neutrality of sports and finance. Now, sanctions, I get it. That is in part politicization. But in part, Europe has lost more than they will gain ever from Ukraine. Okay? You're going to save a few cents on your bread at the cost of 2 million Ukrainian lives. That's it. Other than grain, Ukraine can't produce much of anything else. They have resources which will take decades to build mines. I heard the other day that even if the war ended, you will not see mineral flowing from Ukraine for another 14 years. The mineral deals are future deals. Okay, these are deals set up for future plans. They can't. It's not $1 billion overnight. It's not $1 trillion overnight. Even if they had $1 trillion, which probably, maybe they have 1.4 trillion total. They lost all their oil rights long ago. 30% of their economy is devastated. Let's be generous and say 20% of their economy is now under Russian control. So even if they were to develop mines, provide the labour, where's the labour going to come from? Old men, 45 to 60? No, they're going to flood the country with Indians to do that. So there goes your money, right? There goes your independence. There goes everything. And yet somehow you think you're going to rebuild Ukraine. You're not. You're destroying Ukraine. It's no different from death by cop. And this is Ukraine admitting that they've been hit hard in multiple places with fires. Now, depending, let's see. This is probably the most hit area. Multiple violent explosions are reported at these facilities here. I believe this is the gas. This might be gas and oil. This might be port facilities. It seems to be nothing is what it seems when it comes to Ukraine. But they've hit multiple islands in the river here at Kiev. Now they've also hit... Now sometimes you can get an idea of what's here. But... they've taken away the English labels in a lot of places. My belief is they've hit offices of various key government organisations to do with gas, oil, minerals, and other infrastructure planning and projects. Some of these may have been for fires reported across Kiev, may be from falling drone debris. But there's multiple huge explosions that dwarfed 11-story buildings in the center of Kiev, and those islands on the river. That's gas and oil going to heck in a handbasket. Now, according to Ukraine, they repelled Russian forces. Given the lack of progress here in the north, I would say it's more like they exchanged pot shots. I don't really think there was any major assault today in north of Sumy. It's same here. I think it's just pot shots exchanged to keep the Ukrainians from amassing their troops elsewhere. They're just drawing off troops. Now, there's different reports, but yesterday, I think Sputnik reported that operations resumed in Kupiansk after clearing out militants. I think now that was a mistake. The story now says that they are continuing operations to clear out militants in Kupiansk. So they probably made a mistake in the translation of English and picked up on that. But we do have fighting in Kupiansk and surrounds with no advancement of the troops. And it's not the only area. There are several areas where the Russians have resumed fighting without making any progress. And this is a large front with very, very little progress in areas where previously there was large progress, but now progress is slow. It is a slog. In part, that is due to the fact that some of the temperatures fall very rapidly once it becomes dark. Day is foggy, early mornings. This is shaping up to be the worst winter since 2022. But Russian assault forces have gone into Mariad and withdrawn. Now, the Ukrainians keep saying, oh, we fought them off. No, Russian assault forces don't take ground. They hit and run. But as you can see, their hit and run attacks are working here in Krasny Lineman, and they've taken most of that. But in Rod, street fighting has resumed, but not very far. Not much has occurred. Now, they have made their way to the rail line here at Bisk to cut off supplies going south from Dorpanilia. Now, they've hit Dorpanilia before, but not allegedly. There's been no attacks today. We cannot confirm that because there's reports of drone sightings, but they could have been observation drones, which is why they're not shown on the map as a drone strike. This happens often where you hear reports of drones being seen, but they're actually observation drones, of which Russia launches actually hundreds per day, taking hundreds of photographs per day. They go to the Russian photographic unit. Now, obviously, Russia has AI and it's not manually processing hundreds of photographs. You may not believe this, but women have had jobs for longer than you suspect. Lots of single women worked for the British military for a long time, since World War One, since 1907, processing photographs. And they're doing this now. Okay, but with AI, and Russia's taking hundreds of photographs of the battlefield every day, and you see sometimes with drone strikes, they just hum merrily along the street, and suddenly a car comes around the corner and smashes right into a drone. You think that precision was human? You think a human knew to fly at exact speed and an exact direction and an exact time for a car they cannot see? Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts to this war, which obviously now we're seeing more and more AI being put to obvious use without saying it's been put to obvious use. And right now, I think the American military planners have seen whether or not yesterday they were talking about the British Challenger tank on the British news. But don't forget, oh yes, so we've only lost 2 Challengers, they're the greatest tanks in the world. No, you're treating them like, every time the Russians advance, the first thing they'll pull out are foreign tanks, because the Ukrainians know they get drone swarmed. So they use them to draw off the drones and draw off Russian attention, and as you've seen, photos of Myriad. No tanks, no artillery. How are the Russians being held back? Well, the cold is reducing the number of troops, okay? Defenders in their bunkered buildings are holding off the Russian troops. The Ukrainians themselves, you've seen the lack of armoured vehicles also on the Russian side. That is because most of the vehicle and drone war is not being broadcast. There are only in some of these assaults, there's only 4 tanks. Both sides have reduced their vehicle usage because it's pointless. As soon as there's vehicles in the area, right, as soon as the fighting starts, all the vehicles in the area withdraw to be used as mobile artillery from the rear because they cannot afford to lose equipment right now. Now, that doesn't mean Russia's in a bad position. It just means they're avoiding a bad position because Ukraine, and they are losing equipment. But yesterday, Ukraine was caught off guard in Mariod and were not able to get a shot off before the Russian artillery caught them off guard. Again, that is the advantage of Russia having exact knowledge of where and when surveillance is going to occur in an area, and as soon as that surveillance craft or satellite passes, they advance with their now they have various artillery pieces, but mostly they're the 153s travelling very quickly along these roads, come up, fire. They're backed by drones. That some of them are laser guided. Obviously, you do not see this precision otherwise. The drones are highlighting targets, and you see the Ukrainian positions caught off guard. They had probably just been updated on the Russian positions 10 miles back. They settled down, and the Russians, as soon as the Ukrainian drones or the British satellites had passed, advanced. And sooner or later, Ukraine is going to have to learn they cannot rely on observation equipment. Now, we also saw from the drone footage a lot of static. It means both sides are engaged in heavy jamming, and yet the Russian drones were still flying through. So that means the Russians are also using their large antenna arrays as transmitters for drones to push through the noise. Okay? It's a counter-jamming technique. They're not where you amplify the signal of the drone operator, right? So instead of jamming the drone operator, you are amplifying their drone commands. It's probably why also you only see one drone going in at a time, because they can only amplify one set of channels at a time. Right, so we see Russia's made some advances here in the west and struck the outskirts of Fulopol and other areas in Zaporozhye, making it clear they're going to try and bog down the Ukrainians here while they begin their siege here. But that doesn't mean they aren't going to go above it. But it looks like they're drawing their lines on the map. And again, as we zoom out, Kherson has seen almost no action. Now we've seen Ukraine strike back at Novoprinsk. Let's see what else they hit. Drones attacked an oil refinery. Yeah, drones attacked oil refineries. Again, all about driving up the price. This war is all about driving up the price of oil. This war has been fueled by big finance corporations like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and Blackstone and all the other black operations who, form the WEF, the illegal cartel which controls the European governments. But French news for a long time have rarely reported, but they said this is a calculated attack that targeted Ukrainian infrastructure. So France is contradicting Ukraine's own narrative that Russia's attacking civilians. But that, of course, there's reports, of course, from Russia that Ukrainian soldiers have begun surrendering after receiving threats that if they were to retreat or refuse to fight. Now, yesterday there were reports in the Kiev Independent of warnings issued by Zelensky to mutineers that they will be severely punished. I am Zelensky. You'll be severely punished by my underlings. Ooga booga. Crazy, man. Both sides need to chill for quite some time on the sidelines, but they, for now, of course, this is not widespread. The Russians, of course, are trying to paint themselves as liberators, and the Ukrainians are trying to paint themselves as liberators or resistance. But I mean, this is when, right, two bad guys fight. It's one of these things where even the Serbian president is now talking to Macron and actually getting indications that, France is interested in a peaceful settlement. And the discussion allegedly that Serbia is not going to supply weapons or ammunition. We didn't even talk about it, they said. We talked about peace. This gives me hope. And I think he's right. If France didn't ask for weapons or ammunition, France is now shopping for... I think this is the problem with European politics. It's not that Orban has called for peace. It's the fact that Orban is doing it. It's not that he called for peace. It's that he was making success. And France goes, no. It must be us. We must be the leaders. Vive la socialism. Vive la France. This is the problem. French and their politics. Always petty jealousy. But at least now we have more voices calling for peace. And Macron, with egg on his face, realizing that if France does not want to be dragged into a German-Polish war with Russia, not because they will lose, but the price of victory would be too high. I think even Germany's starting to realize that, and I think Poland, no, bro, this time will be different, But Russia will fight as long as Ukraine rejects peace talks, according to Kremlin. They will eventually have to negotiate, and this is the obvious part. They're in a much weaker position than they were last week, and every week they'll be in a much weaker position until, yes, both sides will make very little progress. Both sides deliberately have their agendas hidden from most of the public, but it's clear from the Russians that most of what they've said is true, and probably from the Ukrainians' perspective, they're just leaving out the fact that when they liberate Crimea, they'll ethnically cleanse the 70% Russian population. They're just leaving that little part out loud. Now, Poland, of course, has made it clear that they're not going to give up. They want Ukraine to give up its territories, but they don't want to give up the territories they took off Germany, and in fact they're willing to fight. And they even want to go after the. They want to seize the territories held by Russia. What's it called? Carlsberg or something, which was actually established by the Germans. It's actually, remember, Poland was under the German rule. The Slavs pushed their way in through the Lithuanian Commonwealth a long time ago. Now, the Slavs had no choice, though. They were being pushed by the Mongols. And this is the thing that most people don't understand. Eastern Europe, other than maybe Romania and Hungary and a few places, are mostly displaced people from history, particularly Ukraine. It was the land in between. There was no people in Ukraine in the 9th century, they started arriving, and by the 14th century at Castle Kiev, and the Russians built up there post Mongolian era. They built up Ukraine primarily as a defense, and then of course it turned into a series of wars, European conflicts getting rather complicated, but eventually, by the time it comes to the era of World War One, just so much angst that nobody could trust anybody. Now, this has to be dismantled, and the European Union has not dismantled these problems. Now, Ukraine, of course, has stated publicly they want to take the pain to Russia, and the Russian Federal Security Services have once again thwarted another Ukrainian security service threat to national security, once again using false flags by recruiting migrants from Central Asia, and attempt to blow up a railway bridge was also thwarted. Now, the Russian forces... See, this story yesterday was different. The story yesterday was the Russian forces completed mop-up of Kupiansk. Now, I don't know how you could mess it up so badly and report today that they continued, but perhaps they made an assumption or made a mistake in translation. But there was renewed fighting in Kupiansk today. This is near the Oska River. This is the bridge controlled by the 121st Motorized Motorcycle Regiment. And they fought with the Ukrainian... Sorry. The Russians fought with the Ukrainian 121st. Now, originally they've taken more streets and eliminated 10 soldiers. Now, this is small street fighting. Apparently, they are retreating down the river, but I would say it's not far. Again, here we have Russian mobile artillery. Again, I would put to you that this is a low-intensity war, that there's a lot of equipment lined up along here and along here, right? I would put to you that there's around 3,000 pieces of military equipment, and only every so often do they go to action to show how powerful they are, and then spend most of the time training and preparing and probably praying that the Europeans don't cross the red line. And I think the Europeans in Poland are pretty much praying the Russians don't cross the red line. So I think as long as nobody crosses the red line, I think eventually Zelensky's rule will come to an end one way or the other. He cannot stay there indefinitely. He's in an untenable situation where he's now faced challenges from his key advisors. He has pre-hostile military officials as alleged opposition leaders to challenge him. He has been challenged with his own party by his senior advisor, and he has only support from the head of the military right now, head of the military and the head of the SBU right now. Even his own, he's lost 2 ministers now, and it's estimated that he could lose the entire government by the end of the week as the growing corruption scandal envelops most of Zelensky's government in stealing millions, right? Up to 12 ministers, allegedly, back already since 2022, have stolen millions in money meant for Ukrainian infrastructure, particularly the Energy and Justice Minister, the Justice Minister covering up, the Energy Minister allegedly dispersing funds, but there are others involved. I think the Finance Minister, I think the Banking Chief, there are going to be lots of heads rolling if the and the Europeans, as I say, if the Europeans are serious about corruption. And for now, it does appear that they do want to appear to be cleaning up the corruption in Ukraine. But whether or not they actually clean up the Ukrainian corruption is yet to be seen. But it's at least they are doing something more than talking about Ukraine. For so long, the Europeans have talked about cleaning up corruption in Ukraine. And I think, this is only an if, but, or a maybe, I think if they can probably negotiate and had better negotiations, I think they could negotiate a four-way settlement where Ukraine gets to be in Europe in name only, that it is not a NATO base or whatever, and in turn, right, we see, now if we're not going to say with absolute certainty, but let's say it's a multilateral deal, right, that Ukraine gets something, Russia gets something, Europe gets something, and China and India get to walk away. Now, then, of course, on top of that, each side is only responsible for their own rebuilding, right? Now, you're going to have some sort of border neutrality. I think if we have a border neutrality, a demilitarized zone from north to south, so from Mykolaiv all the way up the Belarusian border, up to the Belarusian border, along the Belarusian border, all the way over here, there it is, Carlsberg, I think Poland wants that, all the way up there and then across, alright, only leaving what's called the Lithuanian Gateway, so you'll have a split there, so you'll have a clear, complete, pretty much the same rules that have applied now and worked well for the last 50 years in Korea, I think, all along the Russian-Chinese border, I think. Yeah, a complete demilitarization of the borders. And the sticking point, of course, is Zelensky's pride, but I think, given enough time and effort, if the Europeans really wanted peace in Europe, peace in Ukraine, and want their piece of Ukraine, they're going to have to let Russia have. Now, I would again suggest that they do two things, right? Freezing in the front, right? Cut the buffer zones. They may have to give up Donetsk. That's the second sticking point. But the more land they lose by violence, the more it's, every week is 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and 4. It keeps going, right? It's never ending. And deaths actually do continue for months after the war as people succumb to their wounds and despair. Anybody feeling despair should seek immediate help, please. But don't underestimate the stupidity of people en masse when it comes to pride And right now, it seems that Europe, the pride is cracking, which is hopefully Macron realizing that he's got bigger issues on his plate, has to give up at least some semblance of victory in Ukraine, and settlement is preferable to, I mean, from his point of view, right? He wants to make it to 27 and retire peacefully without going to jail. He's going to have to make a lot of compromises, which includes Ukraine. Now, thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and please support the channel. You can support me on Patreon, Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy merch. All my links in the link tree, description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. Appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.